So I want to welcome everybody to tonight's SALT Talks. My name is Patty Schramm. I'm the Parent Resource Trainer Coordinator for the SALT Talks sessions. Tonight, we are looking at Home Sweet Home. We want to talk about housing tonight. There is a lot of concern for us as parents as our child gets out of high school, they start looking for a job, and then we're looking at independent living and housing, and there's a lot of questions that surround this whole independent living idea as we start looking at it as our children get older. So this month we are focusing on independent living and how to structure your roadmap. So if you're still working with an IEP, maybe you can start intertwining some of this. Or if you're not on an IEP, if it's an ISP, or if he's at high school, start looking at how do we work this into our plan? What kind of things do we have to start thinking about? So with that, I'm going to turn it over. We have two sets of speakers tonight. So we have from Warren County Board of DD. We wanted to get someone from one of the local county boards speaking about housing as a general of what they're looking at. And then we also have two speakers from DODD, which is more of a state level looking at it. So with that, we're going to start with Lori Carr and Carol Heil. They're from the Warren County Board of Developmental Disabilities, and we're going to let them talk about housing and from their presentation. So I'll go ahead and get the screen shared for you guys while you introduce yourselves a little more in a second.
Okay.
Well, I am Carol Heil. I'm the Community Resource Director at Warren County DD, and I have been working with people on housing issues for 28 years. So I realize your concerns and your concerns for safety, your concerns for integration. So we've made this presentation kind of generic, so not real Warren County specific, but we can answer any questions, and our emails are at the end. And I'll let Lori introduce herself.
Hello, I'm Lori Carr. I'm the Residential Options Coordinator with Warren County DD, and I have worked in the field for about 20 years. I was a service coordinator in Butler County and Warren County for a combined total of about 17 years. And this position was created just this year. So I'm excited to kind of be a contact person and point for housing questions. And Carol and I work together closely. So I think we'll have some good information to share tonight, and we will be happy to answer any questions that you guys have after this.
So the next screen.
Okay.
Next slide.
Wow. Oops, there it goes. There we go.
So we took our presentation from your questions, the questions that you put in the SALT survey. We didn't want to take you down a road that you didn't want to go. So these are directly your questions. So each slide is going to address one of these questions. Questions that you included were decisions or situations to think about, available funding, cost, other expenses to consider, living with another individual in an apartment or house, how to decide which housing option is best for the individual, and is there available assistance when living independently? So that's kind of our layout. Can you do the next slide, Patty?
Sure. Carol, you want me to take this one? Just go back and forth? Okay.
Yeah, that'll work.
All right. So decisions or situations to think about. Number one is, skills. What strengths, skills does the individual have when looking at housing options? And that is also tied to what type of assistance will they need when they move out into their house. The second thing is needs. What are the support needs of the individual that's looking at housing options? Support can be technology, natural support, so friends and family, people that are already a part of the individual's life, paid homemaker personal care staff, and other staff such as nursing needs, counseling, other people that may be on the team. Big question, when do you start looking at housing? Carol and I talked about this, and realistically, most of us are not ready to live independently when we turn 18, and we usually live at home past that age. I have a 20-year-old who's living in my house currently, so we're trying to, ease him into the world of adulthood. We start our moves toward independence with employment and education decisions, and knowing what we can afford, how we want to live, and what supports will we need when we move out. So those are all questions that, to be thinking about and to be working with your team when you sit down to talk about future planning. Another question, do you have natural unpaid support? Do you have friends? Do you have family who will be willing to assist you when you move into your home? Or will you be reliant upon paid staff to do things for you, like take you to the doctor or take you shopping, out to eat, to events? Those are the types of things that you should be thinking about. It's great if you have natural unpaid supports to pitch in and provide assistance for certain things. Not everybody does. Some people do, and that's okay. We have individuals that have lots of natural support and individuals that really don't. So just something to think about. And then lastly, do you have other support services that can assist in living your best life in your new home? So you want to look at everything that you're going to need to make it a success when your individual, your loved one, makes that big move.
All right, next slide. The next question you asked us was about available funding. And there's lots of funding out there, and you just got to look for it, know where to go. SSI is Social Security income. I'm sure I know you've had entire SALT series or sessions where you've talked about SSI. Of course, there's work income. Individuals need to be able to pay for their bills. So they have to have some form of income before they start planning for where they're going to live. Those bills can include rent, utilities, groceries, entertainment, furniture. And of course, if they have Medicaid, that can pay for medical expenses. Most people that are eligible for SSI are also eligible for Medicaid. So those things kind of go hand in hand. To be eligible for Medicaid, you have to be a United States citizen or meet Medicaid citizenship requirements. Your local job and family services office helps explain these requirements and can help you get enrolled. You have to have a Social Security number, and you have to be an Ohio resident. Every state operates their own Medicaid system, and you have to meet financial requirements. Even if you're not sure if you or your family will qualify, you should still apply. And you can learn more about that by visiting the Job and Family Services website. You can also visit Ohio Medicaid websites. We also are blessed, and I can't speak for every county, but we have a benefits specialist who has been trained in benefits assistance for families. She meets with families. I don't remember what her numbers are, but it's a large amount of people that she supports every year, where she sits down, talks to them about income. A lot of families come into this thinking, well, my son or daughter might not be able to work because that would prevent them from receiving Social Security or Medicaid benefits. That's not true. You can work, and you're encouraged to work, and she can kind of work with you on the different types of benefits, how much you can make to still retain your Social Security, those kind of things. And your transition coordinator, if you have one, or your SSA can refer you to Latasha. Latasha Olinger is our benefits specialist. I did not include her contact information in there, but our emails are again at the end of this presentation. So if you want to connect with Latasha, either talk to somebody you're already working with, or email one of us and we can help you make a connection.
Several counties have a benefit specialist. So if you're not in Warren County, just you can note it in the chat box, and maybe someone that's on can give you their contact information, or I can give it to you after the presentation.
Yeah, and just to add to that, you know, having worked with Latasha for many cases over the years, I mean, it is a great advantage to have that person. She can help with phone calls, or, you know, sitting down and figuring out if there's issues with Medicare and Medicaid. She has been great. So I definitely recommend reaching out to that person. Okay, available funding continued. Well, you've all probably heard about Medicaid waivers. And so, you know, when you think about moving out and getting your own place and having services and supports, you think about what does it take in order to do that? Well, Medicaid waivers do cover supports and services. They do not pay for housing. So that's something, you know, a lot of people may not understand, but waivers pay for services, but not utility bills or rent or housing costs. So, you know, there's, you know, differences there, and it's important just to note that not everybody is eligible for or needs a waiver. Waivers are needs-based, and individuals must be assessed to have unmet need to go on the waiting list and enroll on a waiver. And if an individual has other ways to meet their needs, they might not need a waiver. For example, if somebody has a job, doesn't really need homemaker personal support, but maybe just needs transportation to work, you know, that need could be met in our county with local funds. So we would explore that option before, you know, looking at a waiver. And there's different situations that may apply. So not always is the waiver something that you may need. The current waiting list assessment, if a person has an immediate or a current need for a service in the next 12 months, they can contact the local county board where they live and request the uniform statewide waiting list assessment. Per rule, an immediate need means a person is in a situation that creates a risk of substantial harm to themselves, their caregiver, or another person if action is not taken within 30 calendar days to mitigate the risk. So, you know, there might be some questions about this. You can, you know, if you have questions, you can definitely talk to your service coordinator, your transition coordinator, to see, you know, if this is something that you want to explore. But again, it is needs-based. Waivers are needs-based and would be assessed for that.
I wanted to look at the chat, and there was a question in the chat box. Who's the benefit specialist for Montgomery County? And there was an answer in there. I just wanted to call everyone's attention to it. It's Tammy Disney. Her email address is listed in the chat box for anybody interested in that before I move on. The other thing I want to say, Lori did a real good job of covering that. I had a conversation with a parent yesterday whose daughter had a waiting list assessment and was determined not to have an immediate need, so she didn't go on the waiting list. He was kind of distraught, and after he and I talked, I said, tell me some of the things you want. And he said he'd like her to have a driver's assessment, get her driver's license. He already had an apartment picked out for her, but he needed assistance with rent. And I explained to him all the things that he was describing. None of those were Medicaid waiver services. And I think it was a relief to him. And I said, now, if new needs come up, you can always be reassessed. So it was interesting conversation with him, because at the end, I think we both walked away feeling good, because everything he described were things that could be in our county funded through local services. So he was very happy about that. So available funding continued. Section 8 rental subsidies. We work a lot with Section 8. Unfortunately, in Warren County, the Section 8 waiting list is only open about once a year. It's usually open every spring. When it is open, we find out about it. We notify everybody that we can get on the waiting list for that. That you go on the waiting list, and it may take a few months. It might, I've had people, it took a year to get that actual voucher once they went on the Section 8 waiting list. But what Section 8 is it's not moving into a specific housing development that Section 8. With Section 8, you get a voucher for low-income families, and you use that voucher to pay for rent in the private rental market. Individuals pay part of their income towards it. So the rental voucher, they select a unit, the rental assistant makes market rate housing affordable. So the big thing is your landlord has to be willing to accept that Section 8 voucher. So in Warren County, we work a lot with landlords, kind of trying to bring them on board and get them to agree to take Section 8. Program participants pay 30%, but no more than 40% of their monthly adjusted income towards rent and utilities. The housing assistance payment subsidizes the balance of the rent to the property owner. So the individual cuts a check for their 30 to 40%. However that formula works out, Section 8 will tell you this is your share of the rent. And then they cut another check to the landlord. So the landlord has to be willing to receive 2 rent checks every month. The landlord also has to be willing to have their unit inspected. Section 8 inspects things looking for safety. They look at, are the windows open? Do the locks work well? Do you have GFI breakers? I mean, it's a very safety oriented. They're not real nitpicky about other things. They do look for things like, are there lead-based paint issues? But those are the kind of things that they look for. So the waiting list right now is not open because, as I said, it opens about once a year in the spring. But you can check their website, and we put a link in this presentation to go in anytime you want. And each county is going to have their own Section 8 waiting list, and you can go in and check when the waiting list is open. So you can check it and keep track of that yourself, or if you're involved with us, we're going to let you know. We make it pretty well known. And then HEAP is another funding assistance. We talked about you have to pay for rent. You also have to pay for utilities. HEAP is a one-time, it's a federally funded program, and it stands for Home Energy Assistance Program. And it provides Ohioans assistance with their home energy bills, but it's a one-time benefit. So once a year, you can apply for HEAP, and it can be applied directly to the customer's utility bill or a bulk fuel bill if they have propane, or if they have heating oil, then it can pay towards that. So next screen.
So additional available funding is PIP, the percentage of income payment plan that helps eligible Ohioans manage their energy bills year round. Payments are based on a percentage of household income and are consistent year round. So Ohioans with a household income at or below 175% of the federal poverty guidelines and have utility service from electric or natural gas company regulated by the Public Utility Commission of Ohio are eligible for the program. That includes our folks. If your home is heated with gas, you will have a monthly payment of 5% of your gross household income for your natural gas bill and 5% of your gross household income for your electric bill. If you heat with electric, your monthly payment is 10% of your gross household income. The balance of your utility bill is subsidized by the state of Ohio, and there is a minimum monthly payment of $10. And there is the website there to check out the PIP program. Food stamps, which is now called SNAP, is also an option. If you are on Medicaid, you can apply for food assistance through the local Job and Family Services office. Your family income cannot exceed 130% of the federal poverty guidelines. You can check your eligibility by calling or visiting your county Department of Job and Family Services. And there is the website listed for that. We have a lot of individuals who receive food assistance and individuals who have roommates, that all is figured into their budgets in their household. So that is something that is definitely utilized.
I gave Lori all the hard slides without these percentages. And you know what? I'm going to let you talk about this, Lori, because
Okay.
I give her full credit. Lori created this tool. So,
Well, so what we did recently, and we'll be doing it again, we had a workshop for individuals called Independent Living Workshop. And we had about 11 individuals attend. And these are individuals who, some of which are already living on their own, and a few are ready to move out or preparing to move out. So my coworkers and I created a budget sheet, because this is one of the big things I think that our folks tend to struggle with is budgeting. And when you move out, every single one of us, of course, have to budget our money. And a lot of times our folks move out, there's a payee who's in charge of their money, who just sends them a check for spending every week, but they don't understand where their money is going. So this is a tool that we thought was helpful. We went through it with some folks, and it's difficult. It's a difficult concept, but you just look at your total income, where that income is coming from. If it's, an SSI check, if you have earned income through employment, and then you list your expenses. So, and again, maybe not all these categories apply. There might be something that's not on here, like rental insurance, which is important to have. So, this is a good sheet to work on at home to incorporate in your teams. I encourage anybody to look at their service plan and have an outcome in place to start working on budgeting, who's interested or thinking about moving out in the future, because this is definitely important and something they'll need to understand. Oh, and then this just kind of gives some definitions of expenses, some categories that are used in the spending tracker. So you've got your cell phone, and if there's any debts. I worked with a guy who had taken out a loan and didn't realize he had to pay that back. And so that was an important lesson to learn. Eating out, education, entertainment, all the categories that kind of define what is involved in moving out. You can go to the next slide.
all right. Thank you, Lori. I threw you under the bus on
No, that's fine.
but these are all tools that Lori uses and developed, and we have those handouts that will be available to you if you would like to access those and use those. One of the other questions you ask us is living with another individual in an apartment or house, etc. So this is something you really need to think about on the front end. Do you want roommates? If you do, is there someone you might want to live with? Do they have similar needs? Do they have the same funding available? So those are some of the things. You don't have to have roommates. Some folks choose to live alone. It kind of depends on you, your personality, your skills, and the level of support you need. Most people that live alone are a little bit more independent. So a lot of people start out with roommates, and then maybe down the road say, I'm ready to try this on my own, and move into their own place down the road. So it can look different for each person. Individuals live together in apartments or homes, and they rent, and their rent is figured out for each person, and then their utilities are divided by the tenants. So that's something they have to kind of think about and agree upon when they move in together. Who's going to put the utility, like the Duke bill, in their name? Who's going to put for us, City of Lebanon, bill in their name? Who's going to put the water bill? If they have other, internet, cable, how are they going to divide those up? Those are all discussions that need to be had on the front end. You have some individuals who say, I'm never going to use the internet. I don't care about it. I have no interest. They're probably not going to want to pay a share of that then. So it's going to be divided amongst others. I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice right now. Allergies. Individuals can buy their own groceries when they're roommates, or they can share and have family style meals. It's all individual preference. Usually it's kind of a combination of both. People have things that are theirs, and that's their taste, what they want for lunch, or and then sometimes they're going to buy things as a group and have some meals together. So I would say most, in reality, it's like most of our households, to be honest. And that how it works in our house is sometimes we all eat together and sometimes we're all on the run doing different things. If individuals need a Medicaid waiver provider, and that's something that Lori talked about earlier, when you have that Medicaid waiver provider, that's somebody that comes in and provides supports in your home. Have they talked about it and agreed upon a provider to share those services? So that's a good thing to have discussion on the front end, because the idea, especially when you need 24-hour care in your home, meaning whenever you're home, a provider is there providing support to you, that cost is pretty high. So you're probably going to have to share those services, which means you need to look at shared provider. Are y'all in agreement? Or if you don't already have somebody picked out, do you want to interview people together? And we gave you some examples of things that you might want to ask a potential roommate. Like, do you like to stay at home, or do you like to go out a lot? Where do you like to go in the community? Do you like to go to movies? Do you like to go to sporting events? Do you like to are you a gamer? Or, what are your interests, and share those interests. And they don't have to be exact. You don't have to do everything together, but it's nice to have some commonalities and shared interests. Another important thing to talk about, do you have a pet? Because a lot of people have a family pet and they say, when I'm moving, that, Fluffy's going with me. And so your roommates have to kind of decide if that pet can go with them. I saw a question pop up, so I was going to try to look at that in the chat. Let's see. The question is, how does it work if the individuals have their own staff provider to becoming roommates? Are folks expected to change a longtime staff person when they start living independently? I guess it's going to depend on their cost and what they need to share. So if they both are coming into this with a long-term provider, those are decisions that are going to have to be made. Some people do things like they agree to share a provider for the majority of the services, and then they use another provider that they've got a long-term relationship with to do activities, to do grocery shopping. But those are hard questions. And again, if you don't require a lot of shared services, say you're pretty independent and you each only need 20 hours of services a week, by all means, it's fine to have your own provider. I think where we're talking about that shared provider, shared decision is when you're going to need that 24-hour care and split the cost of that care amongst two providers. So good question. It's not an easy question because those are tough decisions for families if they both have relationships. Do you like to eat meals alone, or do you like to eat with roommates? Do you have any food allergies? Those are important things to talk about too, because we don't keep food locked up. People should have access to things, but if there are food allergies, there might be some things we have to put in the plan to keep everybody safe. So if you've got a peanut allergy, obviously we're going to have to be very careful what we're bringing into the house. I'm just saying that because that's a very common food allergy. Do you keep a clean, neat house, or is that something you need reminders or assistance with? Again, all very important. You may be best friends, but when you move in together and one of you is a slob and one of you is you know, like the odd couple, the Felix and the, I don't know, I'm dating myself how old I am, but it's hard to mesh somebody who's super messy with somebody who's super neat. So you got to talk about that and figure that out ahead of time, because I've seen a lot of roommate situations end because of this issue. That's probably one of the bigger things
Yes.
that in relationships is that I can't stand living with, you know, this person who's too dirty or too neat. And then the other question is, what furniture am I going to need when I move in? Because when you rent those places, most of them are not furnished. So you're bringing furniture. Most people furnish their own bedrooms, and then they decide who's going to furnish the common spaces. You know, like one person may to provide a dining table, one person may provide a couch. You may have your favorite recliner you're taking with you. Those are all things to talk about ahead of time. So, all right, I'll turn it over to Lori.
All good. All right. So how do you decide which housing option is best? So as we kind of touched on, the options are families, individuals living with their families and staying with their families. And, you know, if that's important and you know, that is the best situation, then that's something to explore with your team, and to look at, you know, future costs and funding and what that will take in the future. But that is definitely an option and encouraged. We have the nonprofit housing corporations that provide housing to individuals with developmental disabilities. And this varies by county. And in Warren County, we have the Community Housing Assistance Program, CHAP, which we own about 90 homes with 180 tenants. And so we look at, we have a process in place where we try to match individuals based on need for the homes when there are openings. Our homes vary. We have many different homes. We have some 2-bedroom apartments. We have 3-bedroom homes, you know, and, you know, the options, there are a lot of options. The issue that comes about a lot is people get very focused on the home, but not so much the roommates. And it's really important to focus on the roommates in that relationship. So that's one of the things that we do, is try to match people and follow a process for doing visits outside of the home to get to know one another, and then leading up to maybe doing an overnight or a weekend visit, and involving the team and having a lot of communication when this process gets started. Same thing with, you know, if you're looking at a private landlord. Right now, I have a list of all the private landlords that our individuals work with, some of which, you know, take Section 8, some of which do not. Some families help support individuals with their rent. Some, you know, are reliant on their income. So we do have a list of landlords in the county that we currently work with. Home ownership, we do have a few individuals that own their own homes. Home ownership is great, but it comes with challenges in having funds to do home repairs, etc. Making sure that it's, you know, nothing is going to disrupt Medicaid or services. So that's not something we typically see. Family-owned homes, we have a couple of families that own a home that their family member resides in with roommates. In Warren County, we do not pay rent to family members for their own family. That would conflict because the parents of one resident are also the landlord. So again, that's not something we typically see, but we do have a couple situations. And then, you know, nursing facilities, which is a whole different entity, which is an option for individuals with a nursing need. But any individual that would enter a nursing facility with a developmental disability has to be evaluated to determine if it's an appropriate placement. So there are check marks and things and assessments that have to be done to determine if that would be appropriate for somebody.
And options continued. developmental centers. And I say these options with caution, because these aren't our first go-tos. There's everybody has different levels of need. Developmental centers are typically what people used to think of as institutions. They are used much more creatively now. When somebody is having some challenges in their life, they may go to an developmental center for stabilization. Our local developmental center for Warren County is Southwest Ohio Developmental Center. Obviously, Montgomery County would have a different one. And I honestly don't know which one. And I saw a chat come up again, so I'm going to see if I can answer that question. The question is, are all the homes in Warren County scattered throughout the community or in a pocket neighborhood or type of campus? And then let's see, there's another question. We have our daughter live in our home, separate area for her within the home. Is there any money to go towards rent for her? Someone shared with us there may be funds for that. So let me answer both of those. First, are the homes in Warren County scattered throughout the community? Yes, they are. We have 90 homes. I will say there are more in Lebanon than any other part of the county. I tried spreading out and buying them all over because I wanted to be representative of the county. And our folks tended to want to live in the homes in Warren County more, or in Warren County, in Lebanon more, because they said it was more central to what they do socially, those kind of things. We have homes in Mason. We have some condos. I will say Mason is a little more expensive. So I have a harder time finding houses there. By the way, I oversee the nonprofit housing part. So I buy the houses for us and manage that for Warren County. We have, we have some in Springboro, Waynesville, a lot of homes in Mainville, because there was a time when Mainville had very good prices on homes, because quite frankly, people bought them as starter homes and then turned over and moved out. And I bought them when they flipped them and moved out. So the answer to that is they're all over. We don't have a campus. We do have one it's duplexes that are kind of U-shaped. There's 3 of them and they sit in a little U-shape. I guess that's the closest we would have to a campus. And I just kind of came across that. It was for sale. It was existing. We didn't build it. And it's had its good points and bad points. The good things is you've got a lot of natural supports around and friends around. The bad points are sometimes there's conflict amongst neighbors, but you could get that anywhere. And then the question about having your daughter live in your home in a separate area for her within the home, is there any money to go towards rent for her? As I said, in Warren County, we don't pay a rental subsidy. And I know Section 8 does not either, for a home owned by the family. So I don't know what other counties do as in regard to rent. And if it's a separate part of the home, there might be some other funding sources you can pay for to help her with heat, those kind of things. But I don't think that there's a rent assistance that I'm aware of. And then the next thing on here is intermediate care facilities, which are called ICFs. These are Medicaid funded facilities, and these are all inclusive. So if you pick an ICF and you want to live there, that includes your day program and your residential services. And in Medicaid, we always use the term free choice of provider. It doesn't really apply in an ICF, because if you choose to move to that facility, that provider holds the license for that facility, and that's going to be your provider in that facility. So, but there are people that very much need those type facilities. And we have several within our county. We don't run them. They're ran by private providers. And then there are licensed waiver homes, and we only have a couple of those in Warren County. These are homes that are owned either by the provider or county. Both of ours are owned by the provider. And also in those, because they're licensed, you don't have that free choice of provider. You choose to move into that home. So the provider holds the license and you're going in there. So next slide.
Okay. Is there available assistance when living independently? Yes, there is. I'm sure you've all probably heard about a lot of the technology that's being used. And I won't read through all of this, but technology is a big part of being independent. And there's just so many options now for individuals through supportive technology. The supportive technology-based services include assistive tech and remote support. Something is considered assistive tech if it helps provide personalized support for daily tasks, like a cell phone app that reminds someone to stay on task at their job, or appliances with automatic shut-off features. And remote support uses a two-way communication in real time, like a Skype or FaceTime, like on an iPad in a home, so a person can communicate with a provider when they need them. This allows for them to be more independent in their home without somebody physically being on site. So all great options, and definitely things to consider when looking at living independently. And homemaker personal care then is, we call it HPC, supporting a person to be independent and meeting their daily living needs by having a physical staff person present in the home. Okay, next slide.
And the last slide is our contact information. So you can contact Lori or I at any time if you have questions. And maybe the folks from the state, I'm not sure about their presentation, they may be able to answer the rental assistance in the home. I don't know, in the parent-owned home, but sorry, I couldn't answer that. Are there other questions for us, or do we need to move on to the next presenter?
Is there any other questions for these presenters before we move on? There, stop share. Okay, well, we're going to move on. We do have a second presentation here on housing. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Carol. And again, I know they're like with Warren County, but we'll have all these presentations available. Take what you learned tonight and take it back to your county, your home county, if you have any questions about housing, and see, as a comparison, you can say, this is what I learned, what do we have in place that maybe is similar, or is there anything available along these lines? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to DODD. And I have you, Jeannette and John, I have you both on co-host, so you can share your screen. We have Jeannette Welsh and John Charles.
And John, while you're pulling that up, I'm just going to chime in about the question that someone had advanced around reimbursement or subsidy for a parent who has a child living with them. I am not aware of any housing authority funds that can be used in that way, or other funds. I do know that housing authorities do have different policies across the state. And I do know that they have been in a listening mode when it comes to hearing from parents with disabled children in particular, and people with disabilities themselves who, need assistance and might want to, rent from their parents. I do think this is a topic for the future, and certainly we can't really influence that, but I will say that I think it's really important for all people to be at the table when you're talking with your housing authority as they plan for how they, operate their programs, whether it's about priorities and preferences, or issues that you think should be changed. So that's the only thing I have to say about that. I just encourage people to reach out to their housing authorities and talk with them about some of the challenges, and maybe work towards having them address those a little bit better. Okay, John, you all set?
I think so.
Okay.
So, well, hello, everyone. Thank you for having us. Happy to be part of the conversation. Again, my name's John Charles, and I'm the Capital Housing Administrator for DODD. I work within the Office of Housing and Capital Projects. And as you can see from this slide, there's 5 of us in the office. But tonight I have with me Jeannette Welsh, who is our housing manager. Jeannette brings a wealth of knowledge surrounding housing and related areas. She's an attorney by trade, but her passion is really community housing. She's worked in various roles. She's been at legal aid and Ohio and Ohio Finance Agency, Ohio Development Services, Medicaid, Mental Health and Addiction Services, and DODD. So we're glad to have her. So I think all those experiences, give her a unique perspective. And I'm sure you're going to find her to be a terrific resource. So say hello, Jeannette.
Yes, hi, everybody. Thanks, John. John's a terrific boss, so I'll let John take it away.
Okay, so we're going to talk about housing and some of the housing programs that we administer or we provide support to. In case you're not familiar, our office, we're responsible for administering capital funds to developmental centers, to county boards and their associated not-for-profit housing corps. We work with local boards and nonprofit housing corporations to create and or renovate housing for, individuals throughout Ohio. Our mission is basically, to help develop or make accessible and preserve housing for persons with DD. Also in the office, we handle all the real estate transactions for our department, and we help facilitate maintenance and improvement projects for all of DODD state-owned facilities. And we administer a rental assistance program, and that's geared towards those who are exiting a DC or an ICF. Outside of administering capital funds and projects, we also provide training and technical assistance to county boards and not-for-profit housing corporations and developmental centers. Our main program, which many of you are probably familiar, is our Community Capital Assistance Program, or better known as CCA. The program's been around since the early 1990s. It's available all throughout Ohio, all 88 counties. Basically, the program provides capital funds to county boards and their nonprofit housing corporations for the purchase, construction, and renovation of homes for folks in our system. And the program is geared towards persons leaving a developmental center or an ICF, or people receiving home and community-based waiver services, and those determined to have an immediate or a current need. I like this slide because it shows how the program's been used across the state. Really, this data, that all the little dots on this are since 2017, but you can see that nearly all the counties in the state have made use of the CCA program. In fact, the program's developed over 1,700 homes and renovated over 1,900. So this slide, I just kind of pulled it just because it's my understanding the majority of you are from Southwestern Ohio. So this shows how, in particular, Butler, Greene, Montgomery, and Warren counties have utilized the CCA program in the last 10 years. You can see that the state's invested in a little over $8 million, geared towards 134 different projects. And in the last 10 years, we've purchased 47 homes and helped renovate over 87. So I think I'm going to pass the baton to Jeannette. She's way more interesting than I am, and she has a little better information.
I don't know about that. Anyway, we thought that we would just kind of, in a way of managing expectations, talk a little bit about what we're not going to cover in our presentation today. Luckily, we're presenting alongside with the board today, so they covered some of what we're not going to talk about. And that is our offices, my position was really created to help to develop integrated community housing options for individuals, you know, with DD. And so, you know, even though it, as my position really focuses more on those kind of subsidized living opportunities, things like that. So what we're not going to talk about, and why we have these links here, is things like ICF, living in an ICF or a DC, or taking advantage of programs like shared living or things like that. But we are going to talk about the programs that we administer, as well as the programs that we partner around with other state agencies. And we're going to sort of mention some of those other affordable housing options that can be utilized that are basically in the mainstream. Go ahead and forward, John, please. Okay, so one of those programs that we administer is the Rental Assistance Program, also known as RAP. So the Rental Assistance Program was devised or created in about 2015. And the program, it has definitely changed some, but it's not moved altogether away from, you know, the reason why it was created. So again, the program was created at a time when we had kind of a money follows the person program or home choice. Since then, a lot of the home choice aspects of the program have been integrated into waiver. But our rental assistance program, for that reason, is only available to individuals who are leaving institutional care. So, you know, it does come with that caveat up front. The program provides both monthly rental assistance as well as rental assistance for one-time uses to these individuals who are moving out of institutional settings. And we really focus on the extremely low income population. I think that I heard Lawyer Carroll talk about the federal poverty levels. This program, housing programs, often go by the area median income. So for programs like, you know, our rental assistance program, they're available to people who are at 30% or lower of the area median income. And just a few other facts about our rental assistance program is that it is one that, you know, we're a little undersubscribed right now, so there is some opportunity. And so as I talk more about the program, please feel free to ask questions because we do have openings. Next slide, please. Okay, so right now we have 40 counties that are participating in the program. And while we've probably had a few more counties participating, the truth is that we never really move much beyond that. And we've tried to figure out why we don't have greater participation from other counties. And, you know, sometimes it's because there aren't ICFs there. But of course, as you know, people move often from one county to another. So we also think this is a communication issue, and that's why we never turn down an opportunity to come out and talk to people and to talk about this program, in hopes that if we're missing some folks out there that could utilize the program, that, you know, they make further inquiry. So the rental assistance program is not a program that's like specifically open to the public. And what that means is that we don't take applications from anybody who would submit one. We have to have some sort of a contract. It's actually, we have a boilerplate contract that boards will sign and agree to participate in the program. And so there's an understanding of what the rules are around invoicing and proof of payment, things like that. So when the board enters into an agreement with this state, then we can begin to deliver that rental assistance. Currently, we're kind of down in terms of our participation level. We only have 256 people across the state who are participating. I suspect, and we have had people leave the program, some of them moving back into an ICF, or sometimes they're moving in with their families, or we have various reasons why people depart. But again, we are looking to get those numbers up. Currently, we have 4 people who are participating from the Butler County board area, and so on and so forth, with Greene at 2, Montgomery has 22 people, and Warren has 2 people. And similar to most subsidy programs, participants in the rental assistance program that DOD operates pay 30% of their income. And they also get a small offset or utility allowance when they're responsible for utilities. And I just want to stop there and emphasize for a moment that the rents that we will pay, although we pay at the fair market rent level, if an individual's rent exceeds that amount, we usually just kind of take that overage and apply it to the tenant. So we try to make this a sort of fair and across the board program. And we also, because there's a threshold requirement for people who first come into the program, that they sign up for a housing choice voucher, or they agree to sign up when the application period opens. You know, as you heard from either Carr or Lori, it only opens once or twice a year in their county. So, you know, we're not going to keep anybody over a barrel while they're waiting to get onto the list, but we want them to get onto the list, because essentially how we see this program working, how it's supposed to work, is that people get onto our subsidy, which we consider a bridge subsidy, and then we hope that they'll offboard to some other type of subsidy. In the real world, of course, that doesn't always happen, but it is, you know, something that we try to plan for. Next slide, please. Okay, so you heard a little bit about our rental assistance program and kind of the parameters around that program. Again, it's only available to people who are coming out of ICFs or DCs. The next program I'm going to talk to you about is different from that program. First, in that this program is called the Ohio 811 program, and it's not a GRF or state-funded program. Rather, it's a program that is funded by the federal government, and in fact, HUD. So Ohio's 811 program was shaped following our receipt of a grant back in 2013 from HUD. And we shaped the program based on some of the requirements from HUD. And basically what HUD did when they came up with this program is they revised an old HUD program, which provided both capital and subsidy for housing complexes that were specifically created for people with disabilities, and made it something that was both more integrated, as well as a program that would leverage the state tax credit program in all states. So the idea was by Congress, when they revised the old 811 program, was just to kind of make it more current for, you know, where we are today and what our goals are around kind of the implementation of Olmstead and things like that. So our program is again kind of based on some of those modifications at the federal level when they revised the 811 program. In order to be successful in obtaining a grant from HUD, our state had to show that we had an interagency partnership between our state finance agency, the Ohio Housing Finance Agency, and the state Medicaid agency. And then, of course, DODD and Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services were also natural partners who wanted to be a part of this program. And what's nice about the program is that it utilizes a rental subsidy, much like, you know, we talked about the housing choice voucher, also known as a Section 8 voucher. It utilizes a rental subsidy, but pairs it in a tax credit apartment. So this 811 program is a project-based subsidy. That means that each subsidy is tied to a complex, versus that housing choice program that is the portable subsidy. People select where they get to live. Okay. And so it has a lot of features like a lot of other HUD programs, in that we're really focused on helping people who are extremely low income, and in this case, people with disabilities, to afford rent. One thing, and you can go ahead and advance, John, this may be in the next slide. One thing, can you go ahead and advance if you don't mind, John?
It doesn't want to cooperate.
Oh, I'll just keep talking then until it works. Okay. So one thing about the program that is different than some other HUD programs is that it's a non-elderly disabled program. And that means that participants have to be between the ages, they have to be at least 18, no more than 61. Okay. And so that, that's a little bit different. And in this slide, what I'd like to point out is just kind of where the program currently exists with our 2013 grant. So again, because it lives in the tax credit program, the only places where we have units are where tax credit projects have been funded. So what you'll see here is all of the counties in the state that are currently participating in the program. Altogether, we have about 485 units that we'll be able to make use of across the state. They're located in 34 counties. We weren't sure who would be in the audience today. We did want to point out that there are some units in Greene County, and there's a lot of units in Montgomery County, considering, the number of units overall to the grant. But, we're doing pretty well with getting people into units. It was a tough start, to be honest, but right now we have our point in time number of people housed for the program, and we don't have all the units online yet, is 312. So we have had some people who have had to leave or wanted to leave, but by and large, when people get into these units, because they're, someone talked about safety, really important. These units are often safe, affordable, sometimes accessible. But there's a lot of compliance required by the Ohio Housing Finance Agency. So these properties are kept up, and they tend to be, again, quite nice. Next slide, please, John. Oops. Do I have to tap it? Okay. So there are many housing options across the state, for people to consider. Of course, the board and the nonprofit housing, well, I guess, Carol, you're with the board, but you sort of liaison with the nonprofit, but you guys did a great job at talking about the options specific to Warren County. These are more generic. So, I want to again say that even if there is not an 811 program unit in your county, the low-income housing tax credit portfolio across the state is very large. The Ohio Housing Finance Agency has the largest number of affordable units of anyone in the state. So even if there's not an 811 unit in your county, it's possible that there's a tax credit unit that you could use a voucher in, or that you maybe doubled up might be able to meet the requirements around affordability for. So I think that's really one of the things I do try to sell boards on quite a bit, is that this, not sell, but emphasize that this is another option, because it's one I think that gets overlooked a little bit. And then we also talked about subsidized housing. So there's public housing. Some public housing authorities still own their own properties. A lot of that is going away now with changes to, and priorities at the public housing authority level. But there are still units out there that are, project-based. And then there are some other project-based housing opportunities. So these would be HUD-financed housing, nonprofit-owned opportunities. Vouchers are a way to subsidize your housing expense. We talked about the Housing Choice Voucher Program, also known as Section 8. There's a program that's very similar to it. It's a different type of emphasis. So the Mainstream Voucher Program is a program that these are vouchers that are specifically for individuals who are non-elderly and disabled. And there are a number of public housing authorities across the state that have these vouchers. I don't think there are a lot of housing authorities in the state that have the NED voucher. The NED voucher is also a non-elderly disabled voucher, but often targeted to people who are coming out of institutional care. And last of all, the Shelter Plus Care voucher is a voucher that oftentimes is administered through, you're probably not familiar with it, but if you have heard of the continuum of care, so that would be your kind of homelessness network in your county. Those are special vouchers for individuals who, who meet the HUD definition of homelessness. So there's lots of different vouchers out there. The most common type, I think, that we work with amongst, our folks is obviously that housing choice voucher, but I wanted to mention the others nonetheless. And then last but not least at all is your resource, your nonprofit housing corporation at the local level. I think most, if not all, DD boards work with or have a nonprofit housing corporation. Some of these nonprofits serve multiple counties, so they have contracts with multiple different boards. But they're a real resource because, as John spoke in the beginning of this presentation about CCA funds. So those capital funds are often what nonprofit housing corporations utilize in order to create housing. Obviously, they work on many fronts, but that's one front. That's one place from which they derive funding. Next slide. And this last slide, and I'm sorry, I kind of threw this presentation together hastily, so I'm going to try to tease each of these out. But basically, I wanted to just kind of make a list of things to consider when you identify housing, and whether it's a good option. So I think this probably does duplicate a little bit of what Lori and Carol went over, but hopefully there's something unique in here, some little bits. So obviously affordability is super important, and and you can't ignore, of course, one's income when you're thinking about that affordability. So, if somebody has an SSI level income, they're pretty much probably going to need either roommates or a subsidy. And so those are just, some cold hard facts. The WRAP program, we actually can be a really good resource for somebody who is on a very limited income and, and wants to live on their own. So I guess that would be a consideration for some folks. Accessibility. Unfortunately, trying to find a place that is accessible can be really difficult because even though, there are requirements that public areas meet certain accessibility needs and are accessible to all, very often the units within the complex are not accessible. So there are ways to get past that. People can, if they're offered an inaccessible unit, they can, I'm just going to address this now, but you can ask for a reasonable accommodation to be given an accessible unit, or you can request a reasonable modification to make changes to that unit. Unfortunately, a lot of times who pays for that modification can be a little tricky. Some waivers do have services within them to pay for modifications to a unit. But there's lots of rules around that. And so, I'm just going to leave it at that and just mention it. Services are a really important piece too. We have a lot of people in our programs who do take advantage of technology in order to resolve their service issues. But I mean, people have many different ways of receiving services. They may rely on their natural supports. And so thinking about things like, access and parking are really important. As an example, we had somebody in Cleveland who found a beautiful apartment, brand new, accessible, and it was located downtown, so around lots of like the hustle and the bustle of the city and lots of things to offer. But unfortunately, all of the parking near to the building was really, really high. It was really, really expensive. And so the service provider could not afford to park. So it kind of became a non-starter with that apartment. And it was sad, but I mean, that's a reality. Another thing I would just say is that, making sure that, service providers have the kind of access they need to help somebody who lives in their own apartment. So they may have to ask for a reasonable accommodation for an extra key, or, or a lockbox out front to be put onto the property. So there could be a key fob in there if there are many different service providers going in and out. Those are all things that really need to be thought through up front. Some people get denied access to housing because of a background check. So there are a lot of these third-party providers who perform background checks for housing complexes, and they'll look at things like the person's credit history and their criminal history and their rental history, i.e. evictions. One of the things, you can always do is negotiate. If somebody does get a denial, I always like to say, don't take no for an answer, because if the denial is for credit and the person is going to, for example, have a subsidy, then it's not really very relevant, because if the concern is that the person won't pay the rent, well, they'll have a subsidy, so it will be affordable. Things like criminal backgrounds can be overcome by, really, again, that whole negotiation process. So looking at what's in that report, first of all, making sure that it's true. A lot of times people's charges show up in the report and they're not convictions. So, they may have had something happen, but, it was dismissed or it was pled down. Those are all very relevant facts. When that criminal activity took place, was it 10 or 20 years ago, or was it just the last 6 months, or is it an open charge? Those things are harder to fight. Look at how you can challenge those types of things. There is a really good piece of HUD guidance out there, and it basically states that landlords should, and this pretty much goes for anyone kind of in the HUD arena, landlords should really look at each situation on its own set of facts. So not just having kind of a blanket way of accepting or denying people. So that way, if there are some mitigating circumstances that you can point out that can help, get the person into housing. And last of all, evictions. I mean, eviction happens. And a lot of times it happens because people can't pay their rent because that rent is unaffordable. And so, if somebody's getting a subsidy, that's a very good reason to create an assumption that they're going to be able to pay their rent next time around. So really look at those background check reports and see how you can sort of poke holes in the things that they're saying. And I'm going to answer the question that's up there, but I'm going to keep getting through this list because it's very random and I want to make sure that I cover everything. Payee-ships, really good tool for getting landlords to come on board if they're, reticent about renting to someone. So, let's just say that they, the person has some things in their credit history. if there's a involuntary payee-ship, set up, that can help. I didn't put it on here, but stable accounts, anything that you can use as sort of a bargaining chip with that landlord. And I believe that the previous speakers also talked about pets. When it comes to service animals or emotional support animals, you're no longer talking about a pet. That's not a pet under the fair housing laws. So basically, if you have a need for one of these animals and you're denied it because of a pet policy, you can make a reasonable accommodation to get around it. And so there's loads of information out there on the internet about that. But of course, I'm always happy to talk to people about that particular issue. What kinds of amenities are around the apartment complex or apartment or house is also a really important thing to look at, So are there potential work opportunities that you can walk to? What about your church? Well, your natural supports, your family, your friends. Transportation is another one that I left off here, but it's very, very important. Is there access to a bus line or things like that? And I talked a little bit sort of in going through each of these things about reasonable accommodations and reasonable modifications, but I do want to take a moment just to kind of talk about what those things are. So a reasonable accommodation, so these are fair housing tools, and a reasonable accommodation is basically asking for a waiver from a rule or a policy so that, a person with a disability can live like anybody else. So things like, I need some sort of, there's, for example, a first come, first serve parking policy. Well, that's not necessarily going to work for my provider who needs to be able to get to see me at certain amount or certain time of the day. So that would be a reason you might want to ask for a reasonable accommodation. If your SSI check comes on the 10th, which I don't think is true for anyone these days, but I'm just giving you an example, then you could ask for, your rent to be due on the 10th instead of the 1st. Those are just a couple of things, that I can think of off the top of my head. And similarly, but different, reasonable modification is when you're asking for, a change to a structure, modification to a structure to make that, make the dwelling work better for you. So things like making requests for grab bars in, the bathroom, or for, I'm trying to think, lowering of countertops or widening of a hallway. Some of these modification requests can be very expensive. So, sometimes it's more likely to happen, especially if it's in a federally funded setting than another. But I always say ask, I know that, again, waiver can sometimes pay. I've seen it pay in both the 811 program and in the WRAP program for modifications to a unit. But that is a process to be handled by the experts at the board. I'm going to move on to the next slide, John, and try to bring us home so we have time for questions. So this link is to DODD's housing webpage. We're actually it's a work in progress right now. We have our housing plan posted there, and we have links to the programs I talked about today. At some point in the future, we hope to expand beyond that. And next slide, please. Okay, so these are really important links. These are just some housing search tools. I share these links with family members and constituents who call in all the time. I mean, I do have, I work with, I get a lot of calls from people who are looking for housing and they just don't know, how to search beyond what, kind of the usual go-tos are. So I'll start in the middle here. The Ohio Housing Locator was a state-funded and created resource to look for housing. Go to Section 8 has been around forever and ever. Some people really like that tool. The Ohio Preservation Compact affordable housing search tool is really very very basic, but I like it because it's easy. So a lot of these tools allow you to look by county. So and you can look by type of housing too. So I'm gonna, I think, get us to the next slide and then start looking at questions. This is just our contact information. So now you have John's information and my information. If you have any questions or anything in the future, hold on to this presentation, and we're happy to, always, perform that technical assistance that we talk about all the time. So John, I do see there are a couple things in the chat. I can't tell if they're just comments or, oh, yeah. Okay, so a couple of things here. First of all, the Accessible Housing Matters podcast. I've heard of that too, and I need to check that out. There's a mom from Indiana who's talking about kind of her work, her, I guess, research looking for accessible places. And she visited the Universal Design Living Laboratory here in Columbus. I've been there too, John. I think you were there. You went on the tour with me. That was my second tour. And that is a really good, it really does kind of show you everything accessible, but it's not what I guess everyone, is able to, access, unfortunately. But thanks for sharing those links. That's really terrific. And Patty, I'm going to hand it back to you for taking questions or comments.
There was one question just above that, and I think you answered it, but you may want to just readdress it. Is there any way we can see examples of an 811 subsidized project? Any web pages available?
Yeah. In fact, I'm thinking while I'm talking. Okay, so we actually used to do tours before COVID, and we would create these brochures for every time a new new complex came online. I could share some of those, but what I would rather do is inquire of the person who wrote this, in what county are they looking, because I could probably target something to them that is, in their county or a surrounding county. So do we know, is this like a
Green? They posted Green County. Yeah.
Okay, here's what I'll do. Patty, I can share with you some links to the two, it's one or two, I can't remember, projects in Greene County. What's nice about these projects is that, again, they're tax credit projects. So they have websites, and they often have floor plans, and sometimes they have, like, you can do a virtual tour of a unit, which is really great, especially, again, as we've been living through these COVID times, being able to really kind of virtually walk through a unit is really nice and necessary at times.
Yeah, that would be fine if you can send me the links. And then, well, you had your email up there. She can also email you directly, and you could probably send the links to her too.
You know what? I'm going to make that request if that's okay, because it's
fine.
a specific request. And so whoever asked about the units, I can send links if you just want to share or send me an email, shoot me an email. Okay.
Yeah, that would be good. Nancy, did you get her email? I think I have it in the presentation.
Okay, great.
Yeah, if you could, could you just verify it? I've been writing fast, if you know what I'm trying to say.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to just say there's 2 N's and 2 T's, and I'll spell it for you right now. So it's Jeannette, JEANNE TTE, and then we have a dot in our email, .Welsh, WELSH. Do you have that so far?
Yes.
Okay, and so it's at DODD.ohio.gov.
We also added it to the chat box.
Oh, great.
So It's all
Thank
set
you.
there. It's all there.
Okay.
And I was looking through, I don't see any other questions. I'm going to open it up. I'm going to stop the recording and I'll open it up for any other questions that, maybe someone didn't want to type it or, or whatever, but we're going to stop the recording so we can just have, if any kind of further discussions or any kind of other questions that may come about. Real quick though, before I close, just wanted to remind everybody, next week we have 2 sessions. We have Assault Teens and Me, that is for parents and students. It's a 30-minute on Tuesday night from 6 to 6:30. We're going to be talking about budgeting. And then on Wednesday at noon, we have Angel Sense coming. It's another remote technology opportunity to learn about, a different, something we haven't had them speak yet. So I wanted to make sure everyone had a chance to hear about the Angel Sense technology. And then on October 25th, the last Tuesday of the month, we'll be talking about building daily living skills and thriving in the real world. So look at our schedule for all that. So one second, and I'm going to again thank all of you for your great presentation. You're very thorough. A lot of great information to look at a lot of links. And we do have the presentations in our Google Salt Drive, which we'll put a link in the chat box for those who didn't catch it earlier on. One second while I stop the recording. And again, thank you all for attending.